You're listening to Language Nerds Do Earth, the podcast about linguistics, culture, travel, and how they're all connected. Now, it's time for your language nerd hosts. One in China, one in Spain. It's Patrice and Rachel.
Hello, and welcome to Language Nerds Do Earth. I'm Patrice.
And I'm Rachel.
And we are excited to start this podcast.
Woo!
And we're both a little nervous. The end. I'm so good at this. So I'll go first. My name is Patrice, and I'm a huge language nerd. From the age of 6, I was in a Spanish immersion program. And so in college, I studied abroad in Spain and Germany, both for about 6 months. And so I'm fluent in those languages. I also lived in Korea for 2 years, so my Korean's okay. And I've always just had a knack for picking things up. And eventually I went to get a master's in international business because I just am really passionate about facilitating successful communication among people of different cultures. So here I am in China. I just moved here and I'm Skyping with Rachel, who's in Madrid.
Awesome. That's so cool. And actually we grew up together, or not really together, but in the same town. And I do remember that about you. My mom was always like, Patrice is so good at languages, and she studied German just for fun outside of school, and I was like, wow, well, that is cool. And I thought about yeah, I should study German for a while, but then I don't know what happened. And
I cheated. I had German boyfriends, so that was an extra motivation.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm Rachel, and I live in Madrid. I studied international relations at American University, and I moved to Spain almost 2 years ago or so. And I don't know, I have no plans of leaving anytime soon. My Spanish is pretty good. Fluent is always a hard word for me to use, but...
Yeah, exactly. I said fluent and I cringed a little bit.
Yeah, so it's pretty good. And I speak okay Italian. And I studied abroad in South Korea. So my Korean is horrible, but...
I'm sure it's better than mine, because you were actually taking classes.
I was, but I've forgotten pretty much everything.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I think it's the hardest language in the world. I think it's harder than Mandarin. People are always
really?
like, oh, yeah. People are always like, oh, Mandarin's so hard. Okay, the tones are hard, but you have never seen Korean grammar. Am I right?
The grammar is very hard, but at least you can read it and not have to learn all the characters. But the grammar for objects and for prepositions is very, very different from English or European languages.
Yeah, well, you have honorifics everywhere. Honorifics, just every word you choose, including I. Depends on who you're talking to, which is exhausting.
That's so true.
Yeah. So in China, it's I have cat. In Korea, it's I have to, which I, okay, this I subject marker, cat, object marker, have honorific level. And then make sure you use the right version of have, because maybe there's one that is less polite. So...
That is so true. And they have multiple forms of numbers. And when we learned that all the different objects have, depending on their shape, a different preposition, or I don't know what it's called technically, but
it's a counter. It's a counter.
Yes, I just kind of gave up. I can't do this. It's shaped like a line, so it's different.
Well, to be fair, Chinese has that too, and apparently Japanese has that as well. But Korean's hardest, so there you go.
Okay, well, we've established the hardest language, so that's awesome.
Yeah, just for the record.
All right, so we thought we'd just briefly introduce how we're going to set up the show. So we'll start with a piece of language news, something that's currently going on in the world of linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. We're going to take it week by week and kind of see what happens.
Yeah.
Then we're going to talk about something related to language or travel or culture, mixing them all together, trying to get a good, I don't know.
Ratio.
Yeah, trying to get a good ratio of that in there. And then we're going to move on to what we're going to call Lost in Translation. A personal story that we have, starting with ourselves, and then hopefully we'll get some submissions. And
yeah, we'd like to hear from you. What kind of communication mishaps have you had in the past? So at the end of this episode, we'll give you some examples that we of stuff we'd like to hear.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Let's talk about why we're doing this podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love talking about languages, obviously, and when I was in college, actually, I learned in my first semester, I think I learned something really interesting. Some people call it the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Most recently, it looks like people are calling it the principle of linguistic relativity, and it's basically the idea that language influences our thoughts. And if you look at our iTunes description, in the description is the language you speak is going to affect your thought processes. So I thought we would use this episode to kind of discuss and bring in our own experiences with it.
Cool. Yeah, it wasn't something I was super familiar with, but I read a lot about it, and it relates a lot to things that I studied at college, most specifically probably cross-cultural communication and how our culture, more broadly even than specifically language, impacts the way that we can communicate with each other.
Yeah. There are two versions of the theory, or of the principle. One has been kind of discredited, but it looks like there's still some talk about it. It's called linguistic
determinism.
Yes, thank you. Linguistic determinism. And it's the stronger version of the theory that language determines thought and that linguistic categories limit and determine cognitive categories. The weak version of the principle is that linguistic categories and usage only influence our thoughts and decisions. But there's some really strong evidence for linguistic influence.
So this idea of linguistic relativity was basically popularized by Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf. And it basically states that language determines or influences thought. So basically the language that we speak changes the way that we see the world. And so they're given credit for establishing the theory or the principle, I suppose. But other people also had expressed this before. For example, Wilhelm von Humboldt, I suppose. He put forward an idea around the 19th century. I think I read about 1820s or so. That language is the expression of the spirit of a nation, which really makes a lot of sense because this is when nation states were growing in strength and everything really seemed to be about nationalism, and that led to a kind of a bad
time in European history.
Exactly. He he actually said he thought that German, English, and other Indo-European languages were the most perfect languages, and this explained why the people who spoke these languages, well, had dominance over other people. So,
Okay.
kind of a little bit like social Darwinism.
Yeah. It's a little scary the way that's framed. But
Right.
well, I mean, it's funny because if you speak another language, you kind of know where this is going. Like when I speak German, I feel like I have to be very specific, because the German language, they have so many different words for what to us is like the same thing.
Okay.
Except for pigeon and dove. In German, pigeon and dove is the same word. But anyway.
In Spanish too.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Paloma.
Yeah, that's right. In German, Taube. For the most part, there are just so many very specific words or expressions for what you want to say. So, but then in Spanish, I feel like I can be so much more relaxed. Like, I can be very vague in Spanish because it's kind of a vague, laid-back language. How do you feel when you speak Spanish? Do you think that too?
Let's see. I don't know. When I speak Spanish, I feel... I mean, I don't have a third language that's good enough to compare it with. But, I don't know, compared to English, I feel like a lot of it can be a little bit more direct sometimes. So sometimes I express myself more directly than I would in English, and that could be also just because that's the way that I know how to say it, and but also I feel like, at least in Spain, let's say, people are a bit more direct than I find myself being, and so it's the same when I interact with people. It's like, what do you want? And instead of like, oh, like, hi, how's it going? Like, can I get you something?
It sounds like a big city attitude.
Yeah, it's a bit of that, but also I think, like, Latin American people that are here that I've spoken to are a bit surprised when they first come to Spain. That's
interesting. Yeah, I remember going into a cafe in Barcelona and just the culture of servers. You definitely get that kind of like, okay, what do you want? You're here. You obviously want to buy something. There's never any kind of like dating before the action.
Well, we're really spoiled with our tipping systems, but
yeah, exactly. Well, and we're from the South, right? So
yeah,
that helps.
That's true.
And that probably makes everything seem direct. Like, oh, you already know what I want to order. Yeah, but we had some other really interesting examples, like the Hopi.
I think it was Sapir that was mostly studying Native American languages, and he focused a lot on the Hopi. And so he found a lot of differences. For example, they don't really have a sense of time. So it doesn't, like in English or in European languages, we have tenses, present, past, future, and we talk about days and months and years, etc. But they don't see it as a direct flow of time. So they don't have measurements of time.
Yeah, actually, when I learned about this theory, I think my anthropology professor might have referenced them. Because she said, it was a really long time ago, okay, I have no idea. But she said there's a group of people who, in their language, there's no word for today or tomorrow. So, you plant something, and in English, or in most languages, probably we would say, okay, we plant this, and then later we'll get this. But there's no past or future tense.
Right.
So there's no really thinking about what will happen later after you plant this. I plant this because it's something I do today, and then and then
Except there's no
another.
today.
Right. Okay, so that's really hard. It's something I do.
How can you even, like, we can't even really conceptualize it.
Exactly.
Which I think is one of the main ways that we can understand it, is it's so, time especially is so ingrained in the way that we think about the world, and
oh yeah, especially from English.
Yeah, definitely.
And definitely from German.
Good. Yeah, so true. And Spanish too. Spanish has, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 past tenses.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's like 26 tenses in Spanish.
Yeah. The Hopi also have different concepts for water. So it's a different word, water that's in a container and used for drinking versus water that's free in nature. Well, it sounds like it's an animal, but you know what I mean.
Run free water.
Run free, river.
Be free.
A natural body of water.
There you go. Yeah, okay, there's another really interesting group of people that Swedish linguists actually just within the last 6 months found on the Malay Peninsula, because they discovered them because they weren't there before.
Right.
No, but they found this group of people. They named the language Jedek.
Okay.
And I think it was like 290 people speak Jedek, but it doesn't have a lot of similarities with many languages around it, which makes it kind of random that it's here. But it doesn't have any words for professions. So, for example, like lawyer or teacher or doctor or whatever, there's no profession language, and then they also don't have any vocabulary for buying or selling or ownership. There's just a very complicated, complex vocabulary around exchanging things. And although they don't have professional vocabulary, everybody in the culture is kind of expected to have the basic skills to be a hunter gatherer. So,
okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you, what do they do? What's their
livelihood?
Society like? Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe they were hunter-gatherers who kind of recently settled down.
Okay.
And I don't know, it's interesting, but that's what I would hypothesize from the article I read about Jedek.
That's super interesting.
And I mean, that's kind of like one of the beautiful things about language, this there's very little violence. Violence among children is discouraged. So, but only 290 people speak it. Are those people going to leave town and try to make money somewhere else? And then is that language going to die, and that way of life going to die?
Right.
It's very possible in today's world. So I think a language dies every 2 weeks, which is very sad.
That's incredibly sad.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, going back a little bit to linguistic relativity. You were talking earlier about how it's largely discredited, at least in the determinism, that language determines how you think. But there has been an interesting study about color perception. I don't know if you've seen, if you've read anything about that. But basically, the number of colors that are seen in language varies. So there are 11 basic color categories, and some languages have as few as 2, which would just be black and white. But after that, the next color added is always the same. So then it would be seen in black, white, and red. And then after that, black, white, red, and yellow or green, depending. So that's something really interesting, that we all have the same eyes that allow us to see and the same kind of brains that take it in, but the format of it is completely different from language to language. So that's where I think this has been really prominent and sparked a lot of discussion.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's huge evidence for linguistic determinism. Like, I don't know if you ever listened to that Radio Lab episode they did about color. I think it was like one of their number one episodes.
No, I haven't.
But it's really good. They talk about how they found this study. Some researchers who went from to a bunch of different groups of people who spoke different languages. The people who didn't have the word for blue didn't see the color blue.
Okay.
So they had the word for green, and they saw what we would perceive as blue, and they said green. I don't know if it was that they couldn't tell a difference between that and green, but they looked at the sky and they would be like, "That's green." So yeah,
that's interesting. That really plays into the same thing, I think. I read something about I can't remember which language it was, but they had only one word for blue, and it said something like what we would see as two very different shades, they would have trouble telling the difference because it's the same color.
Right, exactly. I love
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. We should probably mention, like, at the beginning, we were talking a little bit about honorifics in Korean, but like, we both speak Spanish. German also has it.
Okay.
You know, in Spanish we have tú versus usted.
Yes.
In Spain, in my experience in Spain, it was usted was used very rarely.
Yes.
In fact, one time somebody called me usted, and I was like, what's going on? Like, I didn't understand that. And then I was like, oh my God, he's talking to me. It's like a police officer. Spain seems more casual, and maybe there's more a sense of camaraderie, do you think?
That could be.
Yeah, whereas in Latin America, it's really important in some of the Latin American cultures to use usted. Mexico still uses it. I think Costa Rica uses usted almost exclusively.
Right.
So it's very much alive, and you get the sense that people in these usted cultures are maybe a little bit more polite because they see like a difference between somebody that they call tú, which is the informal form of you, and then usted, which is the formal form of you.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I first came to Spain, and I had only ever been in Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America. And I was talking to like strangers and using usted, and they kind of looked at me a little funny. And eventually I got used to using tú only, and now whenever somebody calls me usted, I'm like, am I old or am I like...
Yeah. When I was in Germany last, somebody who was like in their early 20s called me Sie, which is the usted of German, and then du is the tú. And I was like, I mean, okay, I'm 29 now, so I was probably 28 at the time, and I was like, how dare you? How dare you call me Sie? I'm like, that old? How dare you? So yeah, it's weird.
Right, but on the flip side, in Spain they use vosotros.
Right,
and
y'all.
Pretty much no other country that I'm aware of uses that. And so I had never really learned it before coming to Spain. We learned a little bit, but then they're like, psh, it's only used in Spain. And I was like, well, I'll never need that. So I only learned ustedes, and that's almost never used here.
Yeah. I bet that was a big change for you.
Yeah, so if I don't want to sound like a total noob, I have to like speak in vosotros, which is super weird for me, but
yeah. Have you gotten used to it though?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm still a little doubtful, like the conjugation of some tenses, but
yeah. I think the weirdest one for me was the imperative form, like imaginados, like
yes.
Yeah, that kind of like reflexive imperative.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Oh, okay, sorry. Another thing that Rachel found, which is really cool, is the Hununu. I hope I'm pronouncing right. The Hununu have 92 different words for rice, or different names for rice. So each of these names conveys a different reality. I mean, when you think about it, there are like a lot of different kinds of rice, but there's like long and skinny rice and short and fat rice, and that's like and then different colors. That's like my conception of rice, but 92.
Exactly. It has to be related to the texture, to the maybe the time it's been left sitting out. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
Something we can't even conceive of. If it's still growing, if it's picked, I don't know.
Right, and there's like sweet rice and savory rice and rice that goes well with seafood and
and there's the classic example of the Eskimo language, which has 100 words for snow, over 100 words for snow.
Yeah, it's crazy,
mind blowing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like crunchy snow and soft snow. That's what I've got.
Snow that packs and snow that doesn't pack.
Snowman snow, not snowman snow.
Snow that pisses me off and snow that doesn't piss me off.
Yeah, slushy snow.
Black snow.
Yeah, gross.
Oh,
it's
God.
The worst snow. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm sure that where the Inuit live, the snow really matters.
Definitely. And that really has a big impact on how they experience the world. So, of course, they're going to have ways to express that. Whereas we who don't live in constant snowy conditions, we don't need that much to express ourselves about it.
Right, exactly.
All right, so now it's time for our segment, Lost in Translation. Patrice, do you want to go ahead and share a story?
I would love to share a story. In fact, I'm sure I'll be full of great stories since I just arrived in China. I don't know what I'm doing. So, I've been here for a little over 3 weeks now, and it was my first week, and I was walking to my job, and I get out of the subway, and the subway stop at my job is actually a nice little bus station, like a long distance bus station. So there are a lot of people selling breakfast in the mornings for people who have just arrived. And so I was passing this little dumpling stop, and I was kind of looking at it like, maybe it's time for breakfast. Because I don't have any dishware yet. And this guy is selling dumplings in these wooden containers, and I go up to him, and he's like, "Oh, you want this?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And everything is nonverbal. Everything's with body language. So he kind of he points to the wooden thing, and I don't know what's in it, but I'm hungry, so I'm like, "Sure." And he kind of signals like, "Here, do you want to eat it here, or do you want to take it out? Do you want to take it with you?" And I was like, "Okay, I want to take it with me." And so he puts them in a bag and hands them to me, and I'm like, "Yes, this is like a successful communication." And I'm going to eat breakfast today. And he holds up 5 fingers, and I give him a high five. And then I realized he wanted 5 yuan, which is like under $1. And yeah, that's my story of lost in translation. I paid the man that walked off, sadly. He didn't really want a high five. But he got one.
Oh, I love that story. It's just so... It's one of those things that we've probably all done, like waving at somebody who you thought was waving to you. And then you realize they were waving to somebody behind you.
Oh, yeah.
You have to walk quickly away.
They weren't just being friendly.
Oh.
All right, your turn.
Okay, so I guess it was about, I don't know. It was over the summer. And I was kind of rearranging my room and deciding like, okay, I need this and this to make it like feel better. And so I was talking to my boyfriend. So back up a little bit. My boyfriend is from Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And this time we were speaking in Spanish. Normally, our go-to language is English, but so we were speaking in Spanish on this particular occasion, and I was saying, yes, I want to go to IKEA, and I want to get this and this and this, and what I wanted to say was cajonera, which means dresser. So instead of that, I said cojonería, which cojones means balls. And ería is like a place where you buy that said thing. And so, of course, Emilio laughs his ass off because it's hilarious.
I want to go to the ball store.
And so he still laughs at me about it because I don't blame him. I would too. Yeah. He's like, llevan tus cojones.
Don't forget your balls.
Oh, God. And that's one of my many lost in translation moments.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, there are so many. So if you're listening to this, if you're still listening to this, I don't know how long we've gone on now, but we would love to hear from you. You can go to languagenerdsdoearth.com and go to the contact section and submit one of your lost in translation stories, and then we'll read it on the show.
Please, that would be fantastic. We really want to hear that we're not the only ones making fools of ourselves.
Oh my God, all day, every day. Especially here where I'm just like, I'm lost babe. Wee babe. Yeah, so I think that's everything. We're on a lot of different podcast platforms, and don't forget to check out our Facebook. You can email us at languagenerdsdoearth.com, or we are also on Instagram at language_nerds_do_earth. So we try to release a little bit of content every week, talking about recent language news and just keeping you up to date on when the episodes are coming out.
So follow us on all the networks, subscribe,
and leave us a review.
Yeah.
If you had as much fun as we did.
Exactly.
I bet you did. Okay, well, thanks for listening.
All right, thanks.
And have a good one.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.